Today I'm going to be sharing with you a quick and easy layer cake pattern. And I do mean quick. This pattern is going to come together so fast because it only uses 4 blocks. And it's going to still make a very nice size lap quilt. The reason it's going to come together so fast is because I'm sure you're already familiar with this actual pattern. This is going to be a very large scale disappearing 9-patch. So if you're familiar with 9-patch quilt blocks and then changing those around a little bit to make a disappearing 9-patch, you absolutely know how fast this quilt will come together. I am so excited about it. I'm loving it because you know I love quick patterns, and I also love patterns that look a little bit more complicated when you look at it first. Now, the reason I'm thinking about making these larger scale blocks is because I've been getting so much fabric in that I really don't want to cut up really small. So this pattern is great for using up those layer cakes that you just don't want to cut up a whole lot because they have beautiful, beautiful prints on them. So what I'm using today is a Delilah layer cake, and along with that, I'm using some accent fabric. So I have the Delilah layer cake bundle, and then I also have some accent fabric for this quilt. I really thought it would help tie everything together. Now, if you have a layer cake bundle that has some fabric in it that you would really love to have as that accent fabric already, then that will work out great because we're not using the entire layer cake. There's going to be 10 leftover squares from it. So you can definitely skip the accent fabric, which is about 1/3 of a yard that I cut to be able to get the 4 accent squares. So if you have some fabric in here that you would already want to use, then that's fine as well. You don't need the accent fabric. I just wanted a unifying color to go throughout the pattern. What you'll want to do from the layer cake that you have is pick out 16 dark fabrics that you love and 16 light colored fabrics that you love. If you want to use your accent fabrics from your bundle, then also pick out 4 blocks that you'll be using as the accent fabric. So when you get those ready, you're ready to go. I mean, this quilt comes together so fast. So let me show you the layout for it. So for one block, when you're laying it out, you'll have 1 accent fabric that is going to be your center block. Then you're going to have 4 of your dark fabrics, and your 4 dark fabrics are going to go in the corners. So you won't be able to see them all on camera here because I can't get a wide enough frame for how big this works up. So your 4 dark fabrics will go in the corners, and then you'll have 4 light fabrics that are going to go in the center outside edges. So this alternating of the light and dark in the accent will create a really beautiful block design. And like I said, if you really love your prints, this is the perfect way to make a really cute quilt that has some design elements to it, but still allows you to really highlight those prints that you really, really love. So once you get this laid out, you'll just sew each of your rows together. It comes together so fast. So you'll sew your rows together, and then I like to press my top and bottom row. I like to press the seams out to the darker fabric, and then in the middle row I press them into the accent fabric. That really helps you be able to nest those seams and keep everything lined up really well. So let's start sewing. Now that I have all my rows sewn together and pressed, I want to share with you a little sewing tip. Now, when you're using pre-cuts, often they have pinked edges around them. So that's a little zigzag cut around the edge of your fabric. It can be nice because it really helps your fabric not unwind, but unwind or unravel. It really helps your fabric not unravel as much. But it can be hard to sew across them since they're not straight. And knowing if you should sew your 1/4 inch against the edge of the points of the triangle or on the inside edge is really hard to know too. What I often do is just pick one. I can either line my 1/4 inch up against the edge of the point or down at the valley. And I just stay consistent throughout my sewing of the project. Another thing you can do is actually measure your square. So if you measure it and that 10-inch area falls at the points of the pinked edge or at the valley, then you know where you should be sewing. For this project, it's not that big of a deal if you lose just a tiny bit of your fabric by just going at the inside valley, which is where it's easier for me to sew that 1/4 inch seam. But for projects that you really need everything to measure up correctly, it might be very important. So go ahead and measure your squares and just see how they measure up, and it'll make things a lot easier for you. All right, now back to our 9 patch. So now that the 9 patch is all sewn together in those rows, it's time to bring those rows together. And like I said, a tip for you is definitely making sure you press that top and bottom rows seams to the dark side of the fabric, and that center strip, press the fabric to the middle square or that accent fabric you're using. So when you do that, everything will nest together nicely, and you'll end up getting nicer points, and you'll reduce bulk in those seams. So with these long strips like this, I very much recommend pinning. Pinning can be important a lot. You don't see me do it all the time because I don't like spending the time to pin. But whenever I'm sewing long pieces like this, I take the time to pin because they can get wonky. They can stretch out when you're just sewing something for that long. So I'll add some pins in. I definitely pin at the seams, and then I'll add a few more in as well. So pin those seams. You can feel that it's nice and flat and nested together. Add a pin there. And then a few more. And then I'll take this strip over to the sewing machine and sew that 1/4 inch seam. And then we'll be adding that top row on. So the top row up here. Now my huge 9 patch is sewn together. I absolutely love this fabric. So what I'm going to do now is press those last 2 seams that I just sewn, and I'm going to press the seams toward the top row and the bottom row. Since I already have a bunch of seams pressing in to that center accent, I think that'll just help reduce some of the bulk, pressing them in a different direction this time. And then I'll show you how I'm going to cut this for that disappearing 9 patch look. All right, so now that this huge block is pressed, it is time to cut those 2 cuts that we need to do the disappearing 9 patch. Now, like I said, this is a big block. So it's about 29 inches by 29 inches. It's not going to be easy to cut across the centers of these unless you have a really huge cutting mat and a really huge ruler. But if we go slowly, we can make this work and work really well. So I'm going to cut through the middle of this block in both directions. For me, that came out to about 4 3/4 inches to find the middle of this block. If you're measuring from the seam of the center square. So I'm not going to measure from the very edge of this block to find the center because I just don't have a ruler wide enough to comfortably do that. So I'm not going to measure from the edge of the outside of the block. I'm measuring from the seam here at the center where the accent fabric is. So 4 3/4 inches. I'm going to line that up as far across my ruler as I can to make sure that I'm nice and straight. So 4 3/4, I'm measuring across the entire seam. You can see that it's not going to extend all the way across here. So I'm going to have to move my ruler at some point. Now, I got that 4 3/4 measurement from measuring my center square, and that is 9.5 inches, because remember we started off with that 10-inch square and we lost some of the inches from seam allowances. So 4 3/4, I have it lined up here. I'm going to hold this ruler really steady. Something you could do is grab a weight to put on here to make sure it stays firm, and I'm going to make sure by looking really quick that I didn't shift anything, everything's lined up. So I'm going to start cutting across here. Now, when I get to this seam here, I'm not going to lift up my rotary cutter. I'm just going to move my ruler across and make sure it's lined up at the 4 3/4 across here. And even though I'm not cutting back here at the end of the ruler anymore, I'm going to make sure it stays lined up there, because that just helps me make sure I know everything is lined up straight. And then I'm going to continue cutting across. Now, I'm not going to move my 9 patch at all. I'm going to keep it where it is, and I'm going to turn my ruler and do the same thing in the other direction. So I'm going to line up that 4 3/4 line all the way down, and I'm going to cut in this other direction. Now, what you can't see on camera is the end of this block is hanging off the edge of my table here. It is not large enough for me to cut it all at once. Now, if you have a bigger mat or have two that you can push together or something to make this easier, that is wonderful. I don't, so I'm just going to lift it up and move it as gently as I can. I want to make sure I don't cut through up here, but since I'm on only one square left now, I think it's going to be a little bit easier to finish off that final cut. So I'm at 4 3/4 across here, and I can kind of see, you probably can't on camera, where the cut ends, but I'm going to cut that final bit, and you can kind of feel it where you got to where that final cut needs to be. Just don't go too far and, cut through up here where you haven't made your cut before and cut some fabric that you didn't mean to. All right, so there is our 9 patch cut down the middle in 2 directions. So now all we have to do is turn the top right corner block so that our layer cake that we haven't cut through is now in the center. And then the same thing with the bottom left block. We're going to turn it so that these 2 beautiful fabrics are meeting together, and then we're leaving 2 of the accent fabrics in the middle. So fun, this pattern. The disappearing 9 patch is so fun. I've loved doing it on a smaller scale, but seeing it on this larger scale is so much fun because you get to see so much of these prints that you love. I absolutely love it. So all we have to do now to finish off this block, which this block came together so fast, is bring them right sides together. The top row and the bottom row, we're bringing them right sides together. And I'm going to add some pins in to keep it nice and straight. But we're just going to sew these rows together again, press the seams, and then sew the rows together. So quick. And we only have to make 4 of these to make our quilt top. I mean, you could keep adding more and more on. You would make a giant quilt. But 4 of these for a nice lap size quilt, I mean, this is a quick weekend quilt. Perfect to gift, perfect to donate. Right sides together. I'm going to add some pins in. So I'm going to go sew these two seams, press them, and bring the rows together to complete the block. All right, so I have my first row pressed to the left, and then the second row pressed to the right. So that'll help me again nest those seams just as we did before with the 9 patch when I bring this right sides together and add some pins through here. So this final seam will be completing the first disappearing 9 patch block, and then just sew up those 3 more to make a nice quilt top. So this 4 block quilt will be so easy for you to bring together. And if you don't have a layer cake that you would like to use for this project, I do have bundles available in my shop of the Delilah layer cake. If you like the color I am using for this project, there are some beautiful prints in here and a nice variety of light and dark to make this design. And then the same accent fabric I have will be a part of that bundle. But you could always cut up from your own yardage. You just need 4 accent squares that are 10 inches, 16 dark fabrics that are 10 inches, and 16 light fabrics that are cut to 10 inches. So you could definitely do this pattern with stash, cut up some fat quarters that you have or other yardage, use up some scrap fabrics that you have, cut them to size, and make this quilt. So let me sew up this seam and press it, and then we'll take a look at the finished top. So after laying out my 4 blocks to figure out a design layout that I loved, I sewed them together and finished up my quilt top. It is so big and I absolutely love it. It's about 56 inches by 56 inches, so a nice couch quilt, something to snuggle up with and keep warm. I absolutely love this layout. This fabric is so gorgeous, and I'm so happy that with this design, I'm able to highlight the gorgeous prints in it. So let me know if this is a quilt that you might be making soon. It just took me a few hours to sew this up, so all it needs now is to get layered, sandwiched, and quilted and binded. So I love it. I think this is so fun, and I might do this some more where I take some classic block designs and just enlarge them a lot bigger. It's really fun to do. It will make it a lot easier to finish up quilts really fast and still highlight prints that you love. So let me know if you'll be making one. And like I said, there is a link to my shop if you'd like to grab a bundle with the same fabrics I am using. But you could definitely use any fabric you have in your stash. Just cut up 10-inch squares with it. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time. Bye.